Hi everybody. We're going to do a little different style video today. And I definitely a video I'd like you to share with anybody you think it'll apply to. A few weeks ago we were asked by some viewers of our channel that had unfortunately had a member of their family that lost into a PTO accident, and they asked us if we would do a video on PTO safety. And we said we would. I think it's something that's very important. And we also thought maybe we'd kind of try to involve all aspects of safety on the farm. But, and I don't want this to seem like we're coming out there like we're the perfect example of safety. I know we do get a lot of comments on some of our equipment and stuff. And I guess what this video is just to bring awareness to it, and just to have common sense, because a lot of the equipment that a lot of people run isn't new. Doesn't have all the guards and things, and so just kind of to bring awareness, just to be safe around all this stuff. But we do have a special guest with us here today. This is Kevin Bailey. He was very kind, come quite a ways out of his way to join us here, and we really appreciate that.
No problem.
But he's got quite a story to tell, so I will let him tell that.
All right, so back in 1986, I was fresh out of high school, and I was working for a small family farm. There was a neighbor of our farm, and I was operating a piece of equipment that I was comfortable with. It was a wagon and a tractor. It was a John Deere 4000 was the power, which is what we pulled the wagon with. It also powered the wagon to unload. It was a forage wagon, and it's great talking to an audience or a group that actually knows what this stuff is, because I get into a lot of areas where, you know, Dallas or Chicago, and they have no clue what I'm talking about. But your audience should understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So it was just a wagon and a tractor. I was unloading this load. This wagon was one of 3 or 4 that we had in rotation, and this particular wagon had no guard on the power shaft. Okay, a lot that happens a lot on a small family farm. It happened on our farm, happened on the neighbor's farm where I was working. That particular wagon without the guard also had a power shaft that had the square hollow tubing was cracked or stress fractured on the corners, and the tabs were kind of, the end of that hollow tube were open, kind of like a cardboard box. But as I've said thousands of times in a presentation that I give, to me that made no difference.
Yep.
That's just the way it was always done, and I perceived no more danger from that particular piece of equipment than I did any of the ones that even had guards on it. And back then the guards were made out of steel.
Yep.
So why was the guard missing? Possibly it got dented. Maybe it was dropped multiple times on the tongue of the wagon as it was being connected. So I don't know why it was gone, but it was gone. And that left that shaft exposed. Those corners were rotating. And as the wagon was being emptied and unloaded, you know, everybody looks up in the wagon. You know, we were told you were supposed to get on the platform of the tractor, look back in, and get down, put the wagon into high gear, the gearbox on the front of the wagon into high gear, then go back up on the tractor and throttle the tractor up. And I thought I saw a shortcut that I could put into place, and I would step on the tongue of the wagon, take a quick peek, and it was one of those robotic, almost choreographed motions that you could do in your sleep.
Yep.
And boom, I got caught, and I had a pair of Carhartts on. It spooled me in. It broke the power shaft at the tractor, thankfully, because I was still wrapped up in the power shaft. The shaft was connected to the wagon, so if you can sort of envision a wagon behind me, I was working on the driver's side. When things came to a stop, I'm on the passenger side, kind of in a reclined lounge, pool chair lounge position. Mm-hmm. The power shaft connected at the wagon. I went behind my shoulders, and I was kind of laid out on the ground looking at the back of the tractor. And I suffered what they call a traumatic amputation of my right leg, and that was at the hip. And I also sustained injuries to my lower left leg. I think what happened there, as I was laying there, I didn't see any external injuries, and I was kind of, it was laying in the right direction. I was laying in ruts, so my toes were pointed up like they should be.
Yep.
But apparently, between the knee and the ankle, the leg, the tibia and fibia had been shattered, and it looked like a candy cane that's been kicked around the floor at Walmart.
Yep.
All the little shards. So it was damaged, and I'm still dealing with the consequences to this day.
I'm sure, yeah. That we had a similar situation. How many years ago?
It was in 2015, May 26th.
Yep. Right across the road from us on a neighboring property. The couple of the hired employees for the guy were putting in fence, and they had a I don't know the model. It was a newer, bigger John Deere tractor, and they had a 3-point post hole auger. And the post hole auger was an old homemade one. You know, I think they were made out of vehicle rear ends or whatever. And they were, all of a sudden, I remember I was down by the garage. My grandpa was down there. We were visiting. It was just before chore time. I think it was about 4:30 in the afternoon. And Jen was up in the yard. She was cleaning out one of our vehicles. We were getting ready to sell, actually. And I remember this girl, teenage girl, I mean, running as hard as she could up the hill, yelling, "Call 911." She's wrapped up in the power takeoff. And I mean,
She was covered.
yeah, I mean, she was, I didn't know, wasn't even exactly sure who it was, because the guy that owns the property and the guy that was in the PTO both had the same name. So she just said his name, and I didn't know there's like 300 acres over there, and I didn't know where in that. There's woods, it's all cross fenced, and luckily it was pretty much right across from our driveway. But so I run over there, and what had happened, I mean, he was still conscious. He had actually had his belt off, wrapped around his one leg, kind of as a tourniquet, you know. And he had a button-up shirt like this, was open, and his chest was purple. I figured all his ribs were just broke, you know. And he was able to talk to me, communicate, and I kind of tried to keep talking to him to keep him with it, you know. And of course, Jen called 911 right away. And I had my brother go, because we're on a dead-end road. I had him go out to the main road to show the ambulance where to go, you know. But anyway, what had happened was, earlier in the day, I think it was, they were out in the woods somewhere, and so the gearbox for this auger, there's a male shaft that comes out of it, and then your PTO shaft is a female that goes over that male shaft, and then there's a shear pin through there.
Right.
Well, they had sheared that pin, and all he had with him was an old drill bit, which are hard.
Right.
So he put that in there and taped it up, so they only had just a few left to do, you know. And so anyway, what had happened, and of course you couldn't see this, but I went and looked later, so where the knuckle went over that shaft, so you have your hole where the pin goes through.
Right.
Well, under the male shaft coming out, you couldn't see that, was cross drilled. So that had a T hole in it.
Okay.
So all that was holding on that shaft was 4 corners.
Right.
Well, that drill bit was harder than those 4 corners. So he was standing there steadying that auger, and that hit a rock or whatever, and it broke that whole shaft off, and it come around, and of course that drill bit was still in there. That hit him, and it threw him up against the back tire of the tractor. That's why his chest was purple. And he didn't have any broken ribs, which I couldn't believe, and it basically, I mean, who knows how many times, I mean, she was in the tractor, but it's, you know, I can remember some people saying, well, she should have shut it off faster. You know, it's like, that happens so, I mean, before you realize what happened, and
it takes us a minute to process this.
To process that, and of course, she didn't have her phone, and his phone was in his chest pocket, and that got smashed. So I thank God we were home, and he knew we would be home because it was chore time. He just said, run over there, they'll be home. Because she wasn't from this area, so she didn't know, you know. So I mean, a lot of stuff fell into place, and they did manage to save both of his legs. I mean, it was, and I don't know, he's moved out of the area now, so if he still has surgeries or what, but the one leg I know was, I don't know how they saved it, because it was.
Well, you said when they put him in the ambulance, it was.
Well, he said at some time in the hospital, it was the front piece of skin on the top was all that was holding, because they would actually flip his leg up. So he was looking at the bottom of his foot to clean, and then
Right.
so how, I mean, but it was another one of those. I mean, I'm sure he'll deal with arthritis from that. I think his hip was broke. His other leg, I think, wound up being broke too. I don't know how bad, but I mean, that was, I mean, you know, and you hate, and I've said this before, and I said you can't be stupid with this stuff, and I don't mean to sound callous by calling people stupid, but I've done it myself. You do stupid things. You're in a hurry, or like in that case, they were way out. You know, you got 2 holes left to drill. It's like, so we got to drive to town and get. Oh, we'll just throw this in there. You know, it's like that would have probably saved his legs.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
but
Farmer engineering.
yeah,
Get it done.
Yeah,
Right?
and it's, you know, I mean, it's something that always happens, and it's very much. I think most of your farm accidents are 100% preventable. I mean, obviously, you're going to have freak things that just happen that nobody can control. Like we were talking earlier, you know, over time, metal moving, especially at high speed, it's going to stress fracture, and it might just break. You know.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of major industries. They have resources to. They'll magnaflux things and look for potential breaks. But on a small family farm, we have to look at it, I think, as a layer of defense, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So just like wearing PPE running a chainsaw. If you're running a chainsaw, your hand is literally 6 inches away from something that is designed to cut stuff a little bit harder than your flesh and maybe a little bit softer than your bone, but they're made to cut. And you have to go into it knowing that you need to wear your PPE, protect your eyes so you can see what's going on. Possibly your hearing if you want to hear grandkids when you get older, right?
Yeah.
And the chaps, right?
Yeah.
I mean, most of your injuries on a chainsaw happen to lower extremities, and these are all just layers of protection.
Yeah.
And it's sort of similar to a guard. I know you talk about a guard on a power shaft, and I think guards need to be on power shafts. But I also think it's a layered approach.
Yeah.
It comes mindset. Complacency, attitude, fatigue. You mentioned, and fatigue can come in forms of just tired or stress, right? You got to get you get your crop in, whether it's hay and rain's coming, or one more thing. Once it starts raining, it's going to rain for 3 weeks. So we have that stress, and it's important that we don't let that cloud our decisions. Right?
Yeah. And I know there was another one that was. The one with the chopper, that was probably about 10 or 12 years ago now. I think he lost both legs. But he was at a 3-row pull-type forge chopper, and the head kept plugging. And he got mad, and he went out there and tried to unplug it with the whole machine running. And he got mad, and he kicked it, and it caught his foot. And they had a big 2+2 international running it, I'm sure, wide open, and he was hanging on from what I heard. I didn't see this, but basically your guides that go up on the head, he was hanging on to that as his, and the only thing that it was rented land, the guy happened to be home and heard him yelling over the tractor. Right. And because, I mean, otherwise it would have been how long before somebody came with another wagon, pure adrenaline, I think, just kept him out of there,
Yeah.
And that stuff, I mean, that happens. I'm willing to admit I've done things that I shouldn't have, and I think every farmer has, and it's something that definitely needs to be more awareness to, more thought on. I know since I've had kids, and now that the kids are growing up around this stuff, I have found myself a lot more. I'll go to do something, and I'll be like, wait a minute, I should shut this off first, or I should. You just, I guess, as you get older, you think more about that stuff,
So that's an interesting point. My question would be, do you shut it off because you want to set a good example and you want kids to perform this action in the future in a safe way? Or do you come to the realization that you're the sole provider for the family? And if you get hurt, you're putting everybody's lives at risk?
Well, I think kind of both. I know, like, our older skid loader, it doesn't have the roll protection thing has been taken off, and as far as that thing goes, I mean, those old ones maybe are more dangerous in that they weren't really much, you know, but, you know, you always, you got up, you got off to do this or that, and you never shut it off, and it's like, and that one is old enough where you have a center console with both your levers in. So you have to step over that. That's why I think they got rid of that, because that was what would happen.
So it's a design thing? It's the initial design?
I think the initial design, and there was a lot of the early skid loaders that were designed like that, where you had your T controls in a console in the middle. And they didn't have, there was no hydraulic lockout on it, or, you know, you move the lever and it goes. And you would go to climb out, and you'd either have the boom up and you'd hook that lever and drop the boom on you, or it might go, you know. And that was how I was raised around it. I mean, my grandpa ran it you know, that's, and I think that's a big thing is you become complacent with what you grow up around too, you know, I mean, and it's hard, even like safety glasses and stuff. It's out of place for me to grab because we never had, you know, I mean, the only pair of safety glasses I ever remember around here was the rubber bungee that was so rotten that if your head was bigger than the size it was going to break, you know. I mean, they
and I think you're referring to the goggly
ones. Yeah, that's the only kind that were here, you know. The only thing I remember much about was earplugs. My grandpa, a lot of times if we were in the tractor, he'd make you have earplugs, and what was the other one, like grain bins, silent mask for the dust, moldy, you know. But then, you know, a lot more too, we never really did much. Of course, I wasn't in the silos that much, but it's silo gas. You hear, I think every year you hear some place that maybe even 3 or 4 people, you know, one person went up, didn't come back down, next one goes up. And that, I always run the blower, you know, for long time.
Is that something your grandpa showed you, or you just
no
yourself?
That's something I guess I don't remember if he did that or not. Usually grandpa was chopping, so as far as the silo stuff, it was my mom and dad or uncle or whatever. I don't really remember a lot of times when we would fill silo, it sat, you know, for a while before you started feeding out of it, so it wasn't as much of an issue, you know. As,
so, like in industry, they have a whole entire confined space. I was just at I mean, that's kind of what brought me up here, is I had another event that I spoke at, and they were talking about confined space entry permitting and all this stuff. And that's something that's like, to a lot of small family farmers, like there's an entire process that's separate from the normal everyday safety stuff. It's like, this is important enough that we have to have its own process. Like, okay, who's going to be in there? How are you going to do this? Who's your retrieval team? The mechanism that you all, there's way more than I know about, because I've just heard bits and pieces, but I know that you have to have a way to retrieve somebody. You have to make sure you're going to, you know, purge the area of whatever non-oxygen or non-breathable air, I guess would be a better thing. You don't want oxygen in some things too, but so there's an entire process. We don't learn that.
No.
You know, we sort of know it, and you've heard, oh, you know, Joe down the road did this and that, you know, he fell in the silo, and then his uncle went in after him, and he fell in the silo, and then the dad went in, and you know, you start boom, boom, boom. We hear this stuff, I think we're never really trained on that aspect of it.
Yeah, exactly. And like our area too, you know, this is not very agricultural anymore like it used to be. And I don't know how well, I know I was on the volunteer fire department for a couple of years, but you know, we never did any, you know, grain bin rescue or, you know, I mean, you know, if I climbed up the silo here and got gassed, I don't know how well, you know, to respond. I mean, luckily, you know, like our fire department, some of the ones that are on there are farmers, you know, so they would probably have some idea, but it's like I said, farming is, well, it's a stressful job, and it's a dangerous job, like you talked about. You're in a rush, you know, and all of a sudden something you've done you know, maybe this is dangerous and you've everyday thing, you're not in a hurry, it's not a big deal, but all of a sudden you're in a hurry or, and it just, you know, it gets you, you know.
Right. And another thing you bring up is the emotion. You talked about the guy who was mad at the piece of equipment, and then you talk about going up the side of the silo. And I think the whole confined space, emotion comes over. Like a first responder, I'm not saying that they're able to detach themselves from, they're not family.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They're not, most of the time, they're not loved ones, and sometimes they're not friends. I mean, you get into a small community, everybody knows everybody.
Yeah.
So it does, you're kind of intertwining things there a little bit. But as far as equipment goes, the equipment has zero emotion.
Yeah.
It doesn't care. It doesn't care that you have something to do that night.
Yeah.
It doesn't care that you have family, family at home waiting for you.
Yeah.
If you act with emotion against something that has zero emotion, you're gonna come out on the losing end.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't censor frustration.
Yeah.
You can kick it, beat it all you want, and its reaction is going to be the same.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the thing. I mean, you know, you think about it, it's like, you know, you get in a hurry, whatever, you know, you got this nice hay down and the rain's coming. It's like, is it worth your life? Is it worth your leg? Is it, you know, to take the extra step to shut the PTO off or to shut the tractor off or, you know, and really, when you really think about what can happen, it's not, you know. Yeah, because he had the kind of a video of your accident.
Right.
And in talking about it, and I don't know how long that was made after your accident happened, but
Okay, I was hurt in 1986. We shot the video was shot in 2001, so it was that'd be 15 years after.
sure. And one of the things when I was watching it, he had reached out to us and sent us this video. Just he had stumbled on our channel kind of by accident and saw looking for the videos of the uni picker, and that's how he found us. But he sent us the link to this video because he thought it might be something we'd like to have the kids watch. And and we did, and I think it was very good. But one of the things that caught me that I really appreciated about what he said is how he said how my decision or my mistake affected my family. You know, you think about it as, you know, it's my site, it's my leg, if you know, it's my decision, do what I want. But how it affects your mother or father, your brothers, your children, your wife, neighbors, everybody,
Community, yeah.
your whole community, and you get selfish to that, I guess. And I really appreciated when he said that, you know, my mistake, because it is. I mean, if I got hurt once, I mean, I was loading manure and the skid loader, and it tipped up a little bit when I went to dump in the spreader. My foot slid off the front because the way those old ones were made, your feet don't go down in a hole. It's a flat platform, and it slid. Well, when the manure dumped out, the skid steer came back down, and my foot was between the tire of the spreader and the skid steer. And if I wouldn't have had a good work boot on, I think it probably would have crushed my foot. If I would have had a tennis shoe or something on. And I got out of it. Of course, one thing that was good is I'd run that machine a lot, so I was able to kind of knew how to operate it to get it to not cause any more damage, you know. And my dad was standing right there, and he's like, you break your foot? And at first I didn't think so. I'm like, it hurt, but I'm like, no, that's not right. Well, then I sat there a little bit, and it was getting worse and worse, and I said, I think I need to go in. Of course, I'd been hauling manure all day. I stunk like crazy, you know. Of course, you're going into the emergency room and stuff, and they pulled my boot off, and my foot was just purple, and it had a line going right across it. I thought for sure it was broke right there, and thank God. I mean, it wasn't cracked or anything. I don't know how, but
It's amazing.
You know, it's just to see what everybody reacts to that. But that was my, you know, that was my operating, you know, should I have had something across the front of that to keep your foot? You know, now it does,
Right.
you know, after something happened, but it could have been a lot worse, you know.
Yeah, and there are industries that are reactionary. I've been to facilities where their commitment to safety is fix the presses that people have lost fingers or hands
Sure,
in.
yeah.
Right. So they may have a bank of 40 presses out there, and 15 of them have light curtains.
Yeah, yeah.
And those are the ones where people got hurt.
Yeah.
Right. So they'll get to the other ones after somebody else gets hurt.
Yeah.
So, being proactive is a positive thing, right?
Yeah, and I know my dad talked about, he worked south of here a ways, was even kind of more farming community, and this was back probably 40, maybe 50 years ago now, probably 40 some years. He said all the old farmers down there had to call a corn picker hand. Corn picker would plug and they'd reach in there to unclog it, and everybody's hand was like this because the rollers caught it, and that you can't put a guard on a roller like that.
Right.
If it's guard on there, it's not going to work. It's that's a decision that you make, and it's and some of this old equipment. Well, you talk about like the old metal PTO guards. If you don't take care of those properly, if you don't keep them greased, they rust up and basically become just part of the shaft.
Right.
So there's maintenance on that kind of stuff. I think the plastic poly ones, I think they actually have like a grease fitting on them.
Yeah,
so they can
make sure they turn right, or not turn.
Well, or not turn.
Right.
Yeah, so they're free from the
free from the shaft.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's again, it's a layered approach, but I think it's important is people who are out there doing this stuff, and we're doing it with limited resources.
Yeah.
Right, and to maybe have it's hard, and it's hard. Somebody asked me one time, like, what could I say to my kids to help them, work around there, be careful around this stuff? Or what would you say to a teenage kid who's getting on this stuff? And it's like, I don't know if you can say one thing. It almost has to be a culture, and you hear this in industry. You hear it in corporation. You want a different culture or whatever, a culture of safety. It's something that it's not one word.
Yeah.
It's not one slogan. It's leading by example, right? It's helping to demonstrate this and helping them, helping people become aware of what can hurt, what can kill them. My injury was on a farm.
Yeah.
But I speak to companies all over North America. Everything from the space program to toilet paper makers,
Sure.
from pizza makers to just a lot of the oil and gas refinery.
Yeah.
The side of things. And somebody said, well, how's your injury on a farm going to have any correspondence to what we do here? You look at a small family farm. You have confined spaces, as we already discussed. You have heights going up to the top of the silo, right? So you have heights, you have confined space, you have heavy equipment, you have every farm has a small machine shop, but what we don't have, and what we really kind of lack, is a safety program, right?
Yeah.
Now, there are resources, there are things that we can look at. There's a progressive ag. I think it was part of progressive farming. I actually started speaking to that event back in 1999, maybe 2000, somewhere in that time frame, and it's really neat, and it helps foster the safety culture with kids. And the way ours runs, it's run by a coordinator in different areas all over the country, and really all it takes is somebody to say, hey, this sounds good, I think I want to get involved. They contact progressiveag.org, and they connect them with the material and give them kind of an outline. But the way ours was run, the one where I spoke the first time, is we had different breakout sessions. It was an 8-foot table set up around the 4-H Expo Center, and you had pond safety, you had rail safety, firearm safety. ODNR was there. Representatives from the railroad company were there.
Sure.
You had all the different hazards. They had a major breakout session for like the big animal safety, large animals, or the heavy equipment, where they did a tractor rollover demonstration and how to retrieve, which was extremely beneficial for the EMS crews that showed up and the first responders. They brought in a tractor that was weighted to roll. So they made it so it could roll easy.
Yeah.
But it was harder. They realized how hard it is to get, and now they had a dummy underneath there.
Yeah.
And not me, but they had a dummy under there, but they realized how hard, and they lacked the proper cribbing and this and that. So it was kind of a good thing for both to see how difficult it was to retrieve, or help somebody get free from this, and for the kids to see, that this is dangerous.
Yeah.
So it was kind of I think the way the program started is there was a lady in the Midwest, I'm going to say Iowa or Nebraska, maybe Kansas, I'm not sure, but her son was engulfed in grain.
Okay.
I believe it was in a grain bin. And she kind of started this whole movement, and it's been going for 20 plus years now, and maybe even a little bit longer.
Well, you look at even this last summer when we were digging that water line, around here, I mean, because our frost can go so deep, we're down 6 or 7 feet when you're digging for water. And I was down in the hole hooking up the line, and I mean, everybody was around the top, handing me stuff. And all of a sudden, the side caved in. I mean, it knocked me over. It wasn't enough to completely bury me, but it was enough to really scare me.
Right.
If that, or if you were by yourself, especially. I mean, they're not going to. If that caved you in, they're not going to dig you out.
Right.
And, an instant, and that could happen anywhere.
And that is and you go back to the whole. Look at what industry does. I mean, they have cave-in protection, the boxes, the trench boxes to keep all that to help with that. But it's just one of those things. It's not something you probably grew up around or even thought about. It's just I was ignorant of how dangerous this equipment is.
Yeah.
I was ignorant. I'm not saying I was stupid. But I was ignorant. I was comfortable. I was 18 years old. I was invincible. And I knew the shortcuts to make my life easier. Right? And I think that comes into a play with a lot of people, not just in the small family farm setting, but this is company managers nationwide, worldwide deal with the unknown, and we are the X factor, right? Right. You can build equipment and put all the fail safes in place, but there's people who will figure out how to overcome those.
Yeah, and that's, I think we talked earlier too. A friend of mine, he farms and had a silage bagger, and it's got all the PTO shield on it, everything's all, and bagging silage, I've seen him do it. Tractor, 150 horse tractor, wide open. I've seen him grab that cover, because that cover spins with the shaft, it's not chained off, and step right over that. And anything bound up in that, does he grease the cover? I mean, you're not going to stop 150 horse running wide open.
And that's one of the things. One of the ways my dad tried to educate us is there was we had an uncle who apparently, I don't know the whole story. I kind of remember what my dad used to say was, you end up like Uncle Jeff and getting caught up in that power shaft if you step over a power shaft. So what happened is I think it was a hay elevator. It might have been a silage elevator, but it was an elevator. An old John Deere, Poppin' Johnny, was running the elevator. It was running the power shaft. My uncle got too close to it. It grabbed his clothing. It pulled him, kind of pulled it tight, but it stalled the bee. The old John Deere bee. I don't think it was much above an idle. Those things are pretty torquey. But, now that was a story that was used as the illustration of you don't want to have this happen. I almost feel that we probably dismissed it a little bit, like, if we get caught, it's going to stall the tractor. And in my situation, it was a John Deere 4000, like in 1968, 9, early 70s, 97 horse. And it doesn't stall.
No.
And unlike the postal digging incident, thankfully, the power shaft broke at the tractor end. The knuckle, the universal, the yoke, split and flared, and that cross, the bearing cross in there, it fell out, and I was still wrapped up in the shaft. So thankfully, it broke at the tractor, or I may have ended up in worse situation because the tractor
kept turning.
Kept going.
I had luckily no one got hurt. I talked about this, I think, in one of our other videos before I sent it to the scrapyard, but I had a Peerless, it was for roller mill for ear corn, a roller mill blower to grind it and blow it up the silo. And I had that 1256 on there running. I was in the gravity box pushing ear corn down, and Jen and my dad were doing chores. Luckily, nobody else was up there. It was dark. I had just little tractor lights on, and I could hear this all of a sudden. Sounded like a roller chain running loose. That kind of
clanky.
And of course, all the covers and everything were on it. Just the PTO shaft coming, it went into this square cover. And I looked over the edge of the wagon because I heard a bang, and I could see the PTO shaft. It just went into a square hole, and I could see it going like this. I laid down. All I could do was lay down on the corn because you didn't know. I knew something was going to come flying apart because it's, it's running wide open. Well, anyway, so tractor, all I just hear is stuff flying around. I heard something hit the wagon, and all of a sudden I heard this loud bang, and then it was just a tractor running. Well, what had happened, well, then I got calmed down. I shut the tractor down, and I went down and got Jen, and we're walking back up there, and on the opposite side of the wagon, she tripped on something. She's like, what's this? Well, here it was, because that was probably about 1.25 inch shaft or so. It went right from the PTO directly to one of the rollers.
Right.
And then I think it had an 80 roller chain and then maybe a 40. So it had two sprockets on that shaft. But what had happened was prior to when I got it, somebody had welded that sprocket on because it must have come loose. Well, that must have tempered that shaft. So the shaft broke there. So that whole gear, I mean, it was probably, I would say at least 25, 30 pounds, that whole assembly. It had, the PTO shaft, it had come out of that shield, so it bored a hole in there, and it basically flung that whole thing over the wagon. I mean, if I would have been standing up, if it would have hit me, I mean, it would have been instantly done. But then the shaft had turned sideways. It actually snapped the PTO shaft that comes out of the tractor. It snapped that off.
The stub shaft.
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
So I went to the neighbors, our mechanic, and I said, can you replace just the shaft, or do you need to buy the whole assembly? He's like, now what did you do?
No.
It's like, well, I didn't do anything.
Is this 1,000 RPM?
That was a 540.
540.
It was a 540. But yeah, I mean, and that was, I mean, obviously it was the welding that caused it, but I mean, that was, I bought it. You buy used equipment, and
yeah, you get it at auction.
Yeah, all the guards and everything were all in place, but it's sometimes that stuff just happens. But I was thankful nobody. I mean, that it had to fly over the wagon, and it was 30 feet from the thing. I mean, you could have the kids even stand over here,
Yeah, it's like brush hogging.
Yeah.
It's sort of the same thing.
Right? Yeah. There's stuff that, or even lawnmowers. I've heard of people that, kids out and somebody's mowing lawn and it throws a rock. It can throw a rock across the whole property, and so it's definitely just like when I'm mowing lawn. If I see the kids out, it's like go in or go on the other side of the house and play. It's
Well, I think the video that was done, the reenactment of your accident, I felt that was so much more effective at showing the kids versus, like you said, just telling somebody what an accident was. To actually see how they made the fake leg that was wrapped up in the PTO and the stuff. I mean, they thought it was real at first. They're like, how did they film this type thing? And I think, like you said, they're ignorant to how powerful this stuff is, and that like you said, it has no mercy. It's gonna, you make that mistake, or like you said, you get where you think, oh, I'm fine, I can get close, it's not gonna come after me, but it takes that one little thing and boom, it has that power to rip you to shreds.
Yeah.
Right. And you mentioned the filming of that. It's interesting. So if anyone does watch the video, you'll see it's a mannequin or dummy. It's wearing a pair of Carhartts, and the production crew staged this, and they got it all set up, and they thought an unguarded shaft, this guy's gonna immediately get pulled in. So they got it all set up and they tried it. It didn't work. They kept repositioning. They couldn't get it to catch. So somebody had the idea, oh, let's get some hairspray. We'll spray that on the shaft, and maybe that'll help it tack up and pull it in. That didn't work. So what they ended up doing to get it to pull in is put a piece of tape on the leg that wasn't running, obviously. They got everything set, and then when they filmed it, they actually engaged it and caught it at the moment that it started rotating. So that's how they filmed me,
sure, yeah,
getting pulled in. it was showing me standing there with my leg resting on the shaft, and that's the best way we could get it to work. Because we tried a bunch of other ways, like trying to take a broom and push it over, that type of thing, to try to get it to catch, and it wasn't. So they filmed it. They ended up using the tape to get that to happen. Then, of course, once that was done, they were surprised how hard it was to get it. But in reality, that shaft on that particular wagon that they were using, it had a round shaft.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It had a spline on one side or something like that. I think it was a Badger wagon or something. They had a different way of doing it, so it was a little bit harder to get it to catch. So that was part of the filming part. The other thing is the guy who played me when they cut to that scene. He had his leg. They bored a hole in the ground with an auger. Like they had a big. This was a big. At one time, it was a dairy farm.
Okay.
But it turned into a poultry farm, and they used an auger off of a utility truck to drill. They didn't have it on a tractor or anything. This was a big commercial industrial auger. So they drilled a hole like 3 feet in the ground, and the actor that played me, that was laying there after the accident happened, after the PTO pulled me in, he actually had his leg down in a hole, and they had made up a prosthetic, like a latex, and they used like molasses with food coloring for the blood and all that. So that's kind of how that happened. But it happens quick. Like once it happened, they were surprised how fast it happened, but they were getting a little frustrated that it just didn't happen quick.
Well, and that's the thing. Even like with your situation, I mean, you could rub on that shaft 100 times and it might never happen. It just, that crack caught maybe a zipper or a rip in your, it just something, some people, it maybe they've run that wagon like that for 50 years. Well, that never happened to me. Well, that doesn't mean tomorrow it can't.
Yep, exactly. And that's one of the things I think we have to, if you're doing things around the house, if you're not at work where you have everybody looking over you, we think we go home and we can relax and we'll have somebody breathing down our neck, and we don't have somebody, but really we're answerable to ourselves. We're answerable to our kids. We're answerable to our wives and spouses, right? We're answerable to a host of other people. And I think it's important that we take the time to do a little bit of a hazard analysis. Like, you talk about the hay's in the field and it's going to rain, or the crops in the field and you need to get out before the rain starts. And you're always up against weather deadlines. We're up against self-imposed deadlines, but also weather, and that adds a level of stress. And I think it's time for us. We should take the time to just say, hey, what is the worst thing can happen? And if we're willing to answer, okay, this could happen, that takes maybe 30 seconds to just do it in our mind. I'm not saying you answer or fill out a survey. I'm saying you just stop and think, okay, I have to change the guard or the section on this mower. I'm going to crawl under this thing. I know there's a cylinder lockout, but oh man, it's going to rain. I want to get this down so it gets a chance to dry. I'm not going to lock the cylinder out. I'm just going to crawl under that cutter bar and replace that section. You may or may not get caught. You may, the hoses may all hold. The fittings that are 35 years old may not be cracked. Right? You may get away with it, but you may not. And if you don't get away with it, you're going to have your own date that you'll remember all the minutiae that leads up to that moment. Right? So it's important. I think if we took time to just, I know we're not going to have, every piece of equipment's not going to be done and guarded to the exact specs that, it left the factory. When you're buying old equipment, that doesn't happen. You may have to, put a shield together. You may have to do something like that. Or you may choose to operate a piece of equipment without a guard. That's a personal choice, right? You have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Now, if you pick up an old rototiller or an old brush hog where you have no business being off of that piece of equipment while it's running, you may say, okay, I know that I am the only one that's ever going to run this, and no one is ever going to get hurt because I'm not going to get off this thing without the tractor, the PTO off, or the tractor and the tractor shut off. So ultimately what I'm saying is we have personal responsibility in this for ourselves and for people that, you know, our loved ones and our community and our family, right?
Yep. Yep. I think that's just the thing. It's you got to look at what you're operating, what, you know, don't go there, or when it's, you know, having that of shutting it off, or
Well, like you said, keeping that rule in your head of I'm not going to take that shortcut. I'm
Yeah.
because of what can happen. I'm going to make sure that I do this right.
yeah, yeah. And like you said, it doesn't have to be this big long survey, but just before you're going to do something, just think, hey, you know, maybe I should put that cylinder lock down, or shut the PTO off, or shut the tractor off, or you know, it's and it's, I mean, and there's stuff that's unpredictable, especially like we talked earlier about livestock. I mean, you know, if you've got a bull running around, I mean,
But then I would say that was us taking that thing of saying, like you said, when is it there? I'm saying this is not worth the risk. You know, especially having a dairy bull around with the cows that you're handling twice a day, every day.
Yeah.
You're putting that risk there, and we decided that that was not worth the risk.
No, but I mean, even if you're going to, you know, I've seen people that they have a bull, and that's fine, but they're not treating it like a bull. They're out there and they're scratching it, and they're, you know, I don't care if that bull's 200 pounds or 2,000 pounds. If it wants to kill you, it can kill you.
Well, especially,
you know,
the scary part with the bulls and cows, too, is a lot of them are hand raised.
Yeah.
So they imprint on people, not on cows. So then, especially a bull, they're going to try and make sure that they're dominant over you. And that's the one that's going to get you, is the one that you look, when you still look at it, you think, that's my baby calf. Like, he's my pet. He loves me. And it's, no, the testosterone and everything else is like,
well,
no.
like, I can't remember which bull it was, but the one you took him to the
It
fair.
was Jerry.
It was a Jersey bull, and from our experience, Jerseys are about the worst as far as meanness. Took him to the fair. I mean, led him. He was no aggression, nothing. Just
he was 18 months old.
Yeah, and what, he was home from the fair was about a week or so later, wasn't it? And he was up on the hill behind the barn, which is a couple hundred feet from the back door. And Jen went out, opened the door, and she walked out from behind the barn a few feet. And he come after her from the top of that hill. And by the time she got in the barn and got the door shut, he was at the door.
Yeah, I had a quarter of the distance to go than what he did.
And
he
I
was
mean,
there.
a week before we let him at the fair. It was not, I mean, it was just, you know, so it's, any of that, you got to just keep your eye. I used to actually, when we had a bull all the time, I would put a bell on him. Because I had a cow calf out in the woods once, and I was out dealing with that calf, and all of a sudden I turned around, there's a bull breathing down my neck. I had no idea he was there, you know. So then after that, every one of them, when they were little, they got a bell, so at least you could, oh, here comes the bull, you know. And
Yeah, the best decision we ever made, though, was when we finally got rid of having a dairy bull. We still have, like, an Angus bull that'll be a cleanup bull with heifers, but you're not out there. You're not with him. You're not disturbing.
And then they were like with the kids around. It's like, okay, there's a bull out there now. You do not go out there, you know.
And that was hard with the dairy cows because, like I said, the bull's out on pasture with cows. You got to go bring cows in morning and night. You're out there with that bull, and you're moving his ladies, and that was the part that we're like, no, this is just not. Especially like I said, with the Jersey bulls, they were so every Jersey bull we ever had got aggressive.
Really?
Yep.
Wow. Coming from the Holstein side, that kind of surprised me because I always look at Jerseys as just being so mellow. I mean, I know the cows are. They're pretty chill. And a lot of Holsteins are pretty chill. We got a few crazy ones. I know my son works on a farm that milks about 150 head of Holsteins. And there's a few that are a little bit on the crazy side at times.
Yeah, the Jersey bulls. I mean, in Holstein, my grandpa always had a Holstein bull running around, and it was always one of them things, you know, you stay. And of course, my grandpa, you know, you kids stay back. You go get the cows, and he's, you know, 60-some years old, and he's got his old pitchfork, and he's going to go out and keep this bull at bay. It's like, that's not safe either. But and that's another thing, I guess, you know, we've kind of focused on, you know, the kids and the family part of it. But, you know, there's a lot of farmers in our area that are just single. You know, they don't have anybody around, and you're trying to do something. I mean, there was the one here, well, normally he's by himself. Luckily, I think his nephew was there at the time. He was working on a silo unloader, and I think his nephew was, down below turning it on and off, and it was running, and I don't know what happened exactly, but anyway, it jumped up and it got on his leg, and it actually started basically running him over. The only thing that saved him was the drive belt was loose enough that when it got his pants tangled in there, it started. But then he said the belt would get hot and it would grab
again.
And then finally to yell loud enough where his nephew or whatever could hear him, because you got that running. But, there's some of that. You're by yourself.
That is terrifying to think of that, though. How many farmers, and then how long does it take for someone to find them?
Yeah.
If they are on their own.
There was one a few years ago. I didn't know the person, but it was down by Pine City. They found him in the round baler. Sitting there running in the bale. They don't know how long he'd been in there.
I definitely can relate to this. I picked up that load of silage that day that I got hurt, probably a little after 11 o'clock. However long it took to get, we were only maybe half mile away. We had, the 4,000 had a pretty decent speed. So by the time I got to the farm, started unloading, I would bet it was about 20 after 11. 5-6 minutes. It took about 35-45 minutes before the guy realized I was taking a little while to get back. He came over, and he's the guy that was filling the wagons was the guy that ended up finding me. And you talk about working by yourself. I was at the last structure. I mean, it was a bunk silo. We used a little giant elevator to, and we had LSA, liquid silage additive, like a 300-gallon above ground fuel tank with a little reducer fittings to get it down to a pencil stream, and it would stream out onto the silage as it was unloaded. And as soon as the wagon was close to being empty, you had to go shut the valve off. Well, it was taking me so long. The wagon had stopped operating because there was no power. There was no silage coming out. That LSA was spilling out onto the ground. So I'm waiting and waiting. You talk about this length of time. If you're in the situation, that 35-40 minutes is an eternity. And Danny, the guy that was running the chopper, he came over. He thought I was goofing around or something. Why is he taking so long to get back here? What's going on? So he came over, and then he found me. But thankfully, he found me. I was in my head. I had it that the guy who was milking that morning would come out and reconfigure the gates to let the cows mingle around again after they were done milking, or the other farm hand would be coming out to check on. It wouldn't have been right next to where I was, but it would have been closer than one feed bunk for the heifers. He would have at least been maybe a couple hundred feet from me. He would have been around, and I would have had to have been able to yell to get his attention. But that's who in my mind was going to find me, was either the guy that was milking or the other farm hand. And when I saw Dan come up the hill, I was like, whoa, okay, it's been a while, right? So that when you're by yourself, those critical moments, the hour, the golden hour of a trauma victim, you're spent by yourself. It's important that people know where you're at, what you're doing, even if it's a buddy. It doesn't. I mean, maybe you are a solo farmer. You're by yourself. Just, hey, I'm going to be doing this today. If you don't hear from me, just at least check in. Because it could be a long time.
And you hear some people say, well, if I get killed, whatever. It's like, well, you might not get killed either. You could be laying there in unspeakable pain till somebody finds you. I had the mine was a traumatic amputation. If you ask the doctors, they feel that since the femoral artery was a stretch and it snapped back up inside, I only had about 6 inches of femur bone sticking out. But the muscle tissue, the leg muscles, upper body muscles, kind of helped, fall down around that. When you dehorn a cow, you get the artery, same thing. Pull the artery, snap it back in. That helps stretches it like a balloon and allows the blood to sort of coagulate. Plus, your muscles will act as a pretty effective compression bandage in that instance. So
that's probably why I didn't bleed out. I mean, some people say you lost your leg, you're going to bleed out in 5 minutes. Well, I'm telling you, you may not.
Another question we had is what got you into going around and speaking about this, like, you know, from having your accident to going and doing this now?
So the answer to that is midnight inspiration. I was off work. I was working as a tool and die guy at a machine shop in the machine room of a shop, and I had an infection in my left leg, which is still an ongoing issue to this day. And I was off work, and I don't know if anybody's been off work for any length of time and you're used to kind of a regimen and you're not in that, your sleep pattern gets all thrown. And I'm sleeping one night, I couldn't sleep. I had this idea rolling around in my head, and it was like to share a story. You know, it was literally a midnight inspiration. This was in, I would say, June of 2000. I wrote the idea down that night and went back to bed, fell asleep, slept great. The next day, I started getting on Yahoo, because I don't think Google was the thing back then.
Yeah.
I was on Yahoo and searching safety consultants. I had no idea. And I sent out a bunch of emails to a bunch of people that I found online. A guy named Tom Phillips replied, and I want to say he was either in Indiana, Illinois. A guy named Dave Alley from up in Marquette, Michigan replied. Dave had some connections with a Chicagoland Construction Safety Council event.
Okay.
So he sort of encouraged me to do this. This Tom Phillips also encouraged me to, kind of develop a program and to speak. I was like, okay, how do you do that? I didn't know. I mean, I'm used to micrometers, not microphones, right?
Yeah.
So it went from an idea to an ask in one day, and I wasn't sure how to market or anything like that. Like, how do you develop a plan? How do you develop a program? How do you develop an outline? I had no idea. My sister had read a book called, I think it was 10 Seconds by Bobby Petrocelli. His story is he was in bed, a drunk with his wife one night. A drunk drove, somehow it got, crashed into his house, pinned his wife. It was a fatality for his wife. He was beat up pretty bad, but he went out and started speaking. I had left a message, or I called him, or an email to him, but he returned a phone call. So I talked to Bobby, and he's like, you have a great story. You need to niche it in and figure out exactly, and that's kind of on you. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, safety seemed like a good thing. So there's another guy named Charlie Moorcraft. He does sort of what I do. He's been doing it way longer. He's a mentor. And I went and saw him speak locally, and he gave me some pointers. And in the background, I'm getting input from some of these the original Tom Phillips, and I think it was Tom. Might have been Tim. Can't remember exactly, but Dave Alley was really critical because he got me to speak in an event in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
So that spooled things on. We did a video, the video that I think you'll have in the description.
Yeah, we're going to put a link to his video, the Kevin Bailey stories, right?
It's on Vimeo, right?
Yep.
So through that, it really, things started to pick up, and I remember Charlie Moorcraft's office actually getting a hold of me around just after September 11th. It was like September 16th, 17th. They wanted me out in Borger, Texas, for a Chevron Phillips facility, and I think it was on September 19th. The flights had been suspended, but I guess they started coming online. I went to my boss at the time and I said, "Hey, I need to, go to Borger, Texas, in a few days." And I'd already been using up my vacation time and all this stuff. And he's like, "You got to make a decision." So I'm like, "Well, I guess I'm gonna start speaking." So, I finished out a little bit of time with them, periodically going in to help them finish some projects. But I basically stepped away and started speaking full time in late 2001, and it's been really good. Of course, I had some setbacks in 2018 with a surgery on my left leg that I'm still dealing with, and then COVID hit. So it's been kind of slow for a few years, but things are starting to pick back up. But
And then, so like if somebody, wants you to come and speak, is there to get a hold of you to do something like that?
Yeah,
Or-
just email Kevin, Kevin at Speaks on Safety. Speaks is plural.
Okay.
That's my website for the speaking side of things. And I also have a Bionic Life. I have a little YouTube channel.
Yeah, he's got some YouTube going on, so get over there and check that out and subscribe to that.
Yeah, it was that was it's been an interesting experience because anybody who's never done it, which I had never done it. I mean, I already said jobs around my place take about 3 or 4 times longer than they should.
Yeah.
Now you throw camera work in the middle of it, and it's an all-day experience to change oil in a car. Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, but it's been interesting, and it's brought about some interesting. I mean, meeting with you has been.
Yeah,
the
YouTube
thing is pretty cool.
Kind of the same. You don't know, making these videos, who you're going to reach, who's going to see you, or who's going to reach. And I definitely think that this whole video coming together was really kind of God setting this up, because we were contacted by someone to do a video on this, and you had contacted us prior, and kind of just all really come together well. So
right. Yeah, and the good thing too is I may be doing something that's totally unsafe about, because there's things that you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
I may be in the comments, people can say, hey, I saw you doing this. You probably ought to rethink that.
Yeah.
Like, I never even thought about that.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I mean, if you don't know what you don't know, I spoke at a facility, Kimberly-Clark, down in Grange, Georgia, back when I first started speaking, and they made non-woven. The gowns that go in a hospital.
Oh, sure.
Over like in an emergency room, those yellow things that people wear, the schmucks that they wear, and they have this big press that comes in off a big roll, and it goes through this machine and comes out packaged, folded, all nice and neat, ready for shipment on the other end. Well, this is like a 1950s machine, or maybe even older than that. So it had light curtains put on, but there's things, it's not like a modern machine, like farm equipment.
Yeah.
They've retrofitted it with a bunch of stuff. So I'm like, what's this doing? Well, apparently I broke the light curtain and I shut the whole production line down.
Oh.
So, it's it's great to have the input from other people that can point out things. Like, I was ignorant to, you shouldn't point at that was bad. I had no intention of sticking my hand in any closer than I did.
Yeah.
But there was still plenty of room, but there was a light curtain there, and I broke that plane and shut the machine down.
Yeah.
So it's great to have that feedback from people.
Yeah.
To point out areas of improvement. And it might be something that you already are aware of, but it's hard. Things don't show up on camera.
Yeah.
The way you might be a foot, 2 feet away from something, but it might look like your hand is like you're sticking your hand right in that chainsaw.
Yeah,
I know you are. No, I'm not. It's like a foot away.
Well, we had a video once, not really a safety thing, but it was a chopping corn video, and somebody commented that, I can't remember what the comments were kind of going about, nice looking corn or this or that. It's like, I can't believe nobody's commenting that wheel on that chopper is not turning. And I commented back and I said, no, it's turning. It just, the camera's picking it up. No, I've watched it many times. It's not turning. And it like you could not convince them.
Right. Just like, the frame rate, right?
Yeah.
So have you ever seen an airplane flying and the propeller still?
Yeah.
So it's a frame rate. So things it's so hard to communicate.
Yeah.
Effectively sometimes.
Yeah.
Even though it's there, on video, it's just not.
Yeah.
It's not conveying the whole story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's especially like with the kids. We have people, and I totally appreciate, where people are coming from with, they see the kids and they're like, oh, I hope they stay back, and we don't film that before we even started something. You stay up there, you stay back. And
there was one, that somebody did call me out on it, and they were right. I was, I think that's when we were putting the new bearings in the round baler sprockets. And I don't remember if I was hammering the old race out or putting the new bearing in, but anyway, I was in the garage doing it, and I didn't have glasses on. And I didn't even think of it, and I didn't even realize Jordan was standing right there watching me. And somebody commented, like, it's fine if you don't want to have the glasses, but you should have them on your son. And I never even You know, I didn't even realize that, you know, and because you know how a hardened bearing, they can splinter off or,
Yeah. Oh,
you know.
definitely. And you look at too. I think some of it, the interaction, is interesting because some companies they do like a risk assessment or risk tolerance, and they'll grade it from green to yellow to red to orange, or orange to red. Red is being super. You'll jump out of airplanes without with a half pack chute or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, but there's other people who are like, no, I want a bubble around me all the time. And I don't want to I want to make sure everything's perfect. And there's people in between. So I think you have people who have an attitude on YouTube that they're okay with doing whatever, and then you have people that are viewing this thinking you should never do that.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's sort of you have personalities and you have different tolerance for risk.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I think that that's a perfect way to sum that up. Is because what to us is everyday things, to somebody else is, oh my gosh, you're gonna get killed.
Well, and that was when we had another actually YouTube channel, Gearox. There, they come up here and kind of did a dual video, and I think I talked about it more kind of behind the scenes of the video, but we were talking about similar situation, and like George there pointed out, people that are watching this that don't farm, they also don't realize that these kids have grown up. These kids might know more how to run something here than a 40-year-old man who's never been around.
Right.
It might seem dangerous to that person, but it's I mean, even driving those lawnmowers around,
Right.
Is that dangerous?
Right.
It could be.
It could be. And another thing too is people don't understand how you've interacted with your kids and built a culture.
Yep.
So one of the things when Jess and I were talking about, when we found out we're going to have our first boy, Jared, we weren't sure, we've seen kids. Kids are impulsive. They'll do whatever they want in a parking lot, and I can't chase after them. I don't run.
Yeah.
So to us, it was first time obedience was super important.
Yep.
So it was important that when we said stop, they stopped.
Yeah.
And, so some families raise their kids that way, and some don't. So they don't see that. Like some kids know that there's solid boundaries. You stay on this side of the driveway.
Yeah.
Like when you're running silage wagons, hay wagons, equipment's moving around, you're on this side.
Yeah.
Now, I was growing up the kid that dug the corner of a hole under the corner of the fence that my dad put around the yard, so we were supposed to stay in. We dug the hole.
Yeah.
Dad would fill it in. We dug another hole. Dad laid the big square anvil-y thing that they used to make bull rings and horseshoes and stuff like that. And I don't know what it's called, but it's a square block and has a bunch of scallop marks in it. And he would lay it in that hole so we couldn't dig that out. So, kids have the way they're raised doesn't come across in the video.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't understand. Like your kids know.
Yeah.
Here's the solid boundary. You don't go there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
My kids were the same way. They know that there's growing up. They knew that. So I never had to worry about my kids running across the parking lot at Walmart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Or running out into the street. And I've seen kids who are impulsive enough that don't understand that boundary.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the same thing here. Like we have a lagoon for our manure. It's like you don't, and that was even when I was a kid. That was, don't even go up there. You're not, because those manure lagoons, they'll get a crust on them.
Right.
Or in the wintertime even. Well, they'll freeze. Well, they don't freeze hard. It's like don't even go up there. Or
well, they're generating heat, right?
They're generating heat. Yep. And the same way with, I've heard of 2 stories of that now. Like in your milk house, you have your soap and your acid for washing, where kids would come in and
the
the acid looks like juice,
right.
And they'll suck on the pump thing, and I mean they have a screw down lock, but if they're not or I mean that tube is that long. If there's a half a teaspoon in there is enough to burn,
right.
And it's, I mean, that's from the time the first time they go in there. It's like you do not.
Like you ask our 3-year-old, or a 6-year-old, that's bad juju. It's
Yeah,
like,
that's
you
what
know,
when my dad was here. That's what the
Right.
kids would come. He's like, you don't do that. He called
It's
bad
bad
juju,
juju.
you know.
it,
And that
it
was
was something that stuck with them.
Yeah.
That,
You have to
know,
break it down and make it simple, right?
Yeah.
For some
Yeah.
some kids and some adults.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah.
Some
Yeah.
of us are hard learners.
Well, that's even like for you. That time there was a new jug of that pipeline soap there. It didn't even have a pump, but the guy that used to bring them, he used to crack the lid open so it didn't expand
Right.
the jug. Well, anyway, she was in there doing something. And you had coveralls on,
I had
didn't
covers
you?
on, and I sat on it.
She sat
Oh,
on
yeah.
it, and it come up, and all of a sudden she's like, "It hurts here," you know. And I look, and well, it was burnt a hole right through her coveralls and her pants, and you had it burn on your skin
yeah,
for
I
a
had a
long
chemical
time.
burn right on my butt.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was not fun.
So it's, and I mean, that was just, you know, that's not ingesting it. That's just
yeah,
extra.
I just thought that the barrel was shut, and that was fine to sit on because it's shut. There's nothing
Right.
out there.
It's a horizontal surface.
Yeah.
It's meant to
Yep.
be sat on
Yeah.
or set stuff on.
Yeah.
And it was, and then I didn't know what it was, and I had those. I showed those coveralls in a video
Yeah.
about that it was.
And I mean, that's something that, I mean, I'm sure, you know, if you were going to build, like, say, a new milk house that was big enough, you'd have a separate room you could
Right.
put it in and lock. But it's like our milk house is barely big enough for
Right.
the bulk tank that's in there. So you know.
In a small family farms, I mean, do we know about SDS sheets? It used to be MSDS
Yeah,
sheets,
yeah.
right? So do we know the sheets that have the chemicals, and you know, do we know the hazards they present? You know,
Yeah.
and that's what I'm going to plug the progressiveag.org program again, and
Sure.
that's one of the workstations. I may not have said that initially, but that's one of the workstations. They do chemical safety, the lagoon or pond safety.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, just really whatever the local coordinator, and that's the cool thing about it is the local coordinator is the one that sets the workstations up. So I mean, you may not have a rail line. I don't know. Maybe you have railroad tracks. Maybe you don't around here. I don't know.
Nothing right around here.
Our
anymore,
area,
but-
we have quite a few, and a lot of the farms have been bisected by the rail
Yep.
lines. So you not only did you have road crossings that are marked and gated in a lot of cases, some weren't, but you also have private crossings.
Sure, yep.
And we actually had, it's been 25, 30 years ago, we had an articulated John Deere big, 4-wheel drive. It was trying to cross over. Something happened. It got hung up. Whatever he was pulling behind it, and it ended up getting hit by a train, split the tractor in two.
Yeah.
But the guy got out of it. He knew it was coming, dude. But it's still,
Yeah.
we are exposed to a mantra of ways that we can get hurt or
Yeah.
injured, but we don't have the asset of having like resources to have the safety program or procedures put into place. And that's one of the neat things about that program is the progressiveag.org program is it helps foster that culture.
All right. Well, I think that should do pretty good for this video. Did you
Are
have
there
any
any final
other
thoughts
questions
that-
or anything you had to?
Well, you're looking for like some nugget of wisdom. And
Yeah.
right?
I don't know if I have that. No, it's been great to come up and meet you. And
Yeah,
and
really
the
appreciate
conversation we
that,
had prior to this. It was great. The Gearox. I really am interested in the tricycle tractors that they run.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, that's kind of cool. I don't know as if I'd have enough guts to run tricycle tractors on the hillsides that they're running.
We had actually talked about that when they were here, and he's like, we could do a whole video on that. But yeah, he said because that's what we were always taught here.
Right.
We had that bee farm always.
Right.
It was always don't take that on the hill.
Yeah.
And yeah, he actually said his grandpa had bought, I think it was 3 at about the same time. They were like MTAs,
Right.
2 narrows and 1 wide. And he said that the one with the wide front would actually give a lot more trouble on it'd be like going uphill. He said the front would come up and that would start to bounce and it would.
Well, I guess, you know what? If you look at it like a 3-legged stool,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I never really thought of it about that way. But see, that's ignorance.
Yeah,
Right? I
yeah.
don't I never even really thought about
Yeah.
that till you just said
Yeah,
that.
and I didn't either because I mean I seen that too. They run the narrow front. I'm like,
But they
"Man,
got the wide the
yeah,
long of the rear.
and like you said, most of your weight is in the back,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's
Interesting.
yeah. I mean
we're excited to go out there.
yeah.
The kids are especially excited to go out there. Yeah.
I have a model tractor. It's off of one of their tractors. It's a toy tractor. I have the 1650 Oliver.
That's
Although
neat.
mine's a diesel and a wide front.
But all right, well, I guess we'll end this video here. I want to thank everybody for watching, and again, check out Kevin's YouTube channel, and like I said, we'll put a link to the other video there. And just want to thank everybody for watching, and like I said, share this out to anybody. I mean, it doesn't even have to be ag. I mean, safety needs to be everywhere, and I guess if there's kind of a final nugget of wisdom, it's just, common sense. I guess stop and think. Anything can be dangerous if you don't run it properly. So
Yep, and ultimately, companies, corporations, manufacturers can put as much guarding in, as many words in a manual as they want, and it ultimately comes down to us making the right decision in that moment when we have that choice to make.
yeah. So all right, well, thank everybody for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.